in the chat. We'll do our best. Thank you. We'll do our best to monitor the chat. We're going to be sharing insights and going back and forth, but we will also try to monitor the chat. So feel free to drop questions there. Of course, be respectful and supportive. It's a very exciting and stressful process that we're all going through. And so, of course, best to do it with a group of people that are very supportive. And make sure you sign up for Leland. We've dropped some links in the chat if you have not already. Many of you I know are already working with coaches, are already signed up, but those of you that have not, make sure you do that because we send deadlines and other resources and other things and want to make sure you're plugged in. Here's the quick agenda. So I'm going to do some welcome and introductions to start, just give you a quick overview of Leland. And then we're going to spend most of the time talking about the Deferred MBA overview and then the expert panel where we hear from these amazing coaches. And then we will wrap things up and get you out of here on the hour. So we have 55 minutes to whip through a bunch of valuable content and are excited to cover as much as we can. Just by way of introduction, my name is John. I'm the CEO of Leland. I'm also a deferred admit myself. I applied to GSB and HBS like almost 8 years ago. Was fortunate to get into both. And then I decided to start helping people apply to deferred MBA programs long before Leland even existed. So this space is a space that I know and love. I think it's just such an amazing opportunity for people to apply in college and defer. So that's my background. You'll also see Erica and Leland in the chat and other Leland team members that are going to be helping you, sending you resources and making sure you're all squared away. I also want to introduce the amazing panel, and I'll actually let them introduce themselves. But we're very fortunate to have Dion, Ben, and Sydney here. All three deep experience with the GSB and other schools. So very excited to hear from them. Dion, I'll kick it to you first, and then Ben, and then Sydney can wrap it up.
Okay, thanks. Just briefly, I'm a Stanford alumna twice over, undergrad, and I received my MBA there. My professional background is in tech, marketing, communications, international partner development. About 10 years ago, I found a calling in helping others apply to business schools. And since then, I've worked with literally hundreds of applicants who are applying to the top business schools. I'm happy to say in the last application cycle, all of my deferred admits through Leland got into their first choice. Go GSB.
That's great. Thanks, Dion. Ben, I'll give it to you now.
Awesome. That's actually super impressive. So originally from Queens, New York. So shout out anybody from the Queens area. But went to WashU for undergrad. Did a smattering of stuff there, philosophy, neuroscience, and econ, and then went to McKinsey for a couple of years, worked on things like prison reform, and then ultimately wanted to do policy full time. So went to the mayor's office in Chicago and did policy there, but also really discovered kind of a penchant for writing, speech writing at the time before going off to get my MBA at GSB. Loved it there. Ran the GSB paper. Did a bunch of other cool writing oriented things too, and started doing things like Leland. I have just thoroughly enjoyed the past couple of years working. It's just such a phenomenal organization, but also just like meeting and working with folks one-on-one and just helping them take those next steps, whether it's an MBA program, a step in their career, what have you. So I'll pass it to Sydney, but really have enjoyed being part of all this.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Hey, everyone. I'm Sydney. I graduated in May from Georgetown with a joint degree in business and global affairs. In undergrad, I worked in multiple government offices, but I'm now starting full-time at BCG in Los Angeles. And after working there for about 3 years, I'll be attending Stanford GSB through the Deferred MBA process. And this past cycle, I was also admitted to Chicago Booth and CBS through the Deferred program. So after recently completing my own Deferred MBA process, I feel I have a deep understanding of everything that goes into the application. I've first experienced structuring a timeline for testing, recommendation letter templates, essays, interviews, and more. So I'm excited to now be helping others craft and fine-tune their essay and interview narratives and most effectively capture your unique background, passions, and personality in your essays.
Great. Thank you all. Very excited to hear from you in this panel. We'd also love to just get to know the folks on this call. Would you mind dropping in the chat where you're attending college and what your dream MBA program is? It helps us to see real people behind those screens and kind of tailor what we say to what you where you're excited about. Feel free to drop it in the chat. Great, a lot of HBS, Booth, Darden or Tuck, great, Wharton, Sloan, Haas. We got a lot of HBS. This is great. Okay, a good range. Welcome in from all over the country and world. Awesome. Yeah, we'll let those keep trickling in. Okay, so just to do a quick overview of Leland. Many of you are hearing about Leland for the first time. Others of you are obviously more familiar, so we won't spend too much time on this. We specialize in helping people reach their most ambitious goals. And that could be deferred MBA. It could be getting into consulting. It could be a number of other things. Deferred MBA was really our first category because that's what my background is in. So it's our bread and butter. But we do a lot of other things and definitely want to help you with multiple goals in your life. The way that we do that is through one-on-one coaching with coaches like the three we have on this call. These coaches also teach group classes that you can join. We do a bunch of free community events like this, where we share a bunch of insight for free and try to help you get started. And then we recently, actually earlier this year, we launched Leland Plus, which is a content subscription that we're going to give you a huge discount for everyone on this call tonight. But it includes tons of sample essays, resumes, in-depth videos specific to we have a deferred MBA track. So it's not just MBA, it's actually a deferred MBA track, tons of valuable content and resources that can kind of help you get started. And then as you start to actually write your essays and want to get help from a professional, then you can start to work with a coach. So definitely encourage you to check out all of those options. On the coaching front, a lot of people ask, like, what do I do with my coach? What do I get? So and I think Sydney did a good job of kind of introducing some of the things that coaches could do. It could be a kind of putting together a timeline for you. How should I think about test prep? It could be, how should I approach just the general application strategy? Of course, essays and actually brainstorming, outline, editing that is super valuable. Letters of recommendation and preparing, selecting, and guiding your recommenders to do a good job. Resume editing, which typically is actually more work than students expect coming from recruiting. Your MBA resume is going to look a lot different. And then, of course, interviews. We've been doing a lot of HBS and GSB interviews for traditional cycle this week because they recently announced their round one interviews. So we do basically up and down the entire process. And these coaches are truly experts. I mentioned Leland Plus. If you use the code DMBA, you'll get $110 off, basically cutting the price in half just this week. So definitely encourage you to take advantage of that. Only people on this call are going to be aware of this discount code. So encourage you to take advantage of that. We'll drop the link in. I think Dalen just dropped it in. It's a bunch of amazing materials and encourage you to definitely check that out and take advantage of this discount code. We don't do things like this very often, but wanted to make sure that especially students are set up for success in this process. Okay, let's shift gears and talk through a general deferred. I'll whip through this and then we'll cut over to the panel. So what are deferred MBA programs? Deferred MBA programs are programs that you apply to as a senior in college or a master's student if you went right into your master's program. That's who's eligible to apply. Once you're accepted, you defer 2 to 5 years while you work.
You got hella shit done, bro.
Hold on.
Here, you can use my story.
Mute.
Always
Wait,
one.
I have my
Always
glasses
one,
on.
John.
There's always one. We'll get them muted. All right. Thank you, host. Applications are due in April, typically. Sometimes there's a secondary deadline in June. And then also for schools like the GSB, you can apply round 1 or round 2. But most of the time people apply in April. The application process is pretty much identical to what you'd see in a traditional application process. There are sometimes a few nuances of what they're looking for that's a little bit different, but it tends to be the same essays, the same types of things on the recommender front. It's a great way for you to lock down a school and for them to lock you down and to get in the door early and start to build your career around going back to your MBA program. There's lots of reasons why you should consider applying. I think the first is that it's sort of a no-risk shot at an amazing program. Schools, and I've heard this from multiple deans of admission, that it is absolutely not a negative signal if you apply and don't get in. If anything, it shows interest and it shows continued interest. So if you don't get into your dream school and you apply 4 years down the road, it shows them, hey, this person has been interested in our program for years, and look at all their progress. They did what they told us they were going to do. So it's a no risk shot for sure. Gives you lots of flexibility and career options as you think through, oh, maybe I should join a startup or take a risk because now I have this thing back in the, locked in a few years down the road. It gives you an early career boost, helps you connect with some of the alumni and students at that school even before you attend, which is really a nice opportunity. Of course, these programs are getting more competitive and there are fewer spots, but the people on this call are likely people that are hardworking on top of their careers. And so you can kind of take advantage. If you have a great full-time offer lined up, it's a great way for you to get it, kind of get ahead of your peers and apply before they even think about applying to MBA programs. You also tend to burn different social capital, meaning the recommendations that you or the recommenders that you work with likely won't be your recommenders for 3 to 5 years down the road. And so it's a good way for you to kind of jump in and ask them for support now, and kind of burn that capital now versus waiting 5 years when you won't be able to. You learn a ton about the application process, and most schools actually waive the application fee, or it's very affordable to apply. So those are just a few of the reasons. Pretty much all of the top programs offer a deferred MBA program, which is amazing. Back when I applied, it was only HBS and GSB, and one by one, all of these schools have both launched and focused on these programs and and really care about admitting lots of their class from the deferred process. Some of these schools specifically, like Columbia and Booth, are admitting a lot of students every single year. Of course, all of them are admitting usually close to 100. GSB, obviously a smaller class size, so they admit less, which is even more impressive that we have Sydney here on this call with us. I think they're all very interested in the deferred process, and so it's a great way for you to get in the door early and build a relationship with the school. Just a quick overview. We're going to send out this recording, so you'll have this, but just a quick overview of the deadlines. As you can see, most of them in April. So do not procrastinate. That's why we're doing this in October. So you have plenty of time to get going on your applications. So the deferred application process requires a lot. And I'd love to just turn this over to the panel too and get your thoughts. How would you recommend starting? Because there are so many things. You have to knock out the test. You have to think about application strategy. You have to get your recommenders going. You need to select extracurriculars, awards, and honors, or even start to volunteer and do them if you don't have extracurriculars on your resume already. Of course, land a full-time offer in addition to polishing your resume. The essays take a lot of time, especially if you're applying to multiple schools, and then you of course have interviews down the road. Maybe I'll kick it over to you, Ben. How do you recommend starting if you're a senior or even a junior right now on this call?
Yeah. So I think the first things to do are take a crack at everything. Not to say do everything at once, but one of the things I always tell people to do is just open the application. It gets over kind of a mini psychological hurdle, but it also lets you see what all of the puzzle pieces are that will ultimately go into the holistic app. If you understand the fact that you have 3 optional essays, for example, to talk about your impact for GSB, maybe you don't feel like you have to overemphasize that in your main essay. Similarly, see what your resume contains, update it, get an iteration going, because you don't want to double down on that content necessarily in your essay. You want to keep that focused on the core question, which is what matters most and why, for example. So start early, get started at all, and try to take a small crack at every piece of the process.
That's great. Dion, anything you'd add? And then Sydney?
I totally agree with Ben. There's a huge advantage of looking at all the components of the application and how they can work together. And I would urge people to not think that it's a total mystery what admissions committees are looking for. They indicate that through the components, and what you can do to help them do their job in selecting people is providing the specific accomplishments and information that they need to show that you are a high reward, a low risk applicant.
That's great. Sydney, what about you? I mean, maybe you get a little bit more tactical here. Like, how did you think about this in your senior year?
Yeah, exactly. Well, in my experience, I definitely looked at the overall puzzle. and kind of got started on brainstorming essays throughout, but I really tackled the GMAT GRE piece first. So I took a diagnostic for both. And in my case, the GMAT was a better fit for me. So I got started studying on that first. And I think that was super helpful to kind of knock that out so that I had ample time to really not just, brainstorm the essays and write them, but refine them, because you kind of don't want to overlook how much time it takes to really like get down to the word count and put your best foot forward for each individual school, and those short answer essays that are in applications too, about your family, your background, and like Ben said, those impact questions at GSB specifically.
That's great. All right. Would love to hear from the chat. What do you see as the most daunting part of this application? There's a lot here. This doesn't even encompass everything. I almost feel guilty just putting essays here because it takes so much time, but there's a lot here. What seems to be the most daunting? Would love to hear it in the chat. Test score. Yeah, we hear a lot of test score. Essays, of course. Recommendations. I personally was most nervous about recommendations because I felt like it was the only part of the process I couldn't control. As a control freak, I wanted to, but there is a lot you can do to control. The why essay. This is great. Okay. Yeah, this is kind of in line with what we tend to see and where we can be most helpful. So let's jump in. Maybe we'll start with you, Sydney, because we went to you last. What's your best tip? Which is a tough question, because there's a ton of things to think about. But let's just start with the basics. What's your best tip for applying to a top 10 deferred MBA program?
I would say time management. I know we spoke to it a little bit in the last question. I think every applicant is going to start test prep and essay writing at different stages. So whether it's junior year, senior year, everybody has different commitments. But before you start, I think it's really important to understand what your schedule looks like as you begin the process, and to really map out sufficient time for yourself, and to not only complete testing and refine your narrative, but to reach out to recommenders, to cultivate that relationship throughout and give them ample time to support you as well.
That's great. Dion, what would you say?
I would second Sydney's comment and just say it takes a lot more research and reflection than one would think to really put together a strong application.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if there's one thing that you can take from this is do not underestimate how much work it takes to put together a really strong application. There's a lot of like unknown unknowns when you start this process. It takes a lot of time. Ben, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I think one thing I would add is that none of these components, if you get the sense that any one of these feels like an accident or feels relatively forced as you're going through it, that's the sign that it's probably your biggest weakness in your app, or something you really want to work on. Or if you're thinking about applying and you want to prepare for this, like when you ask your recommenders, hey, would you write me a letter of reference for business school? You shouldn't feel like it might be random, or it might be a little bit, if you feel like it's really early, it probably is. And so I think as you try to put the components, or even if you're applying a little bit later and you're trying to think about like, what are the parts that make me the most uncomfortable? They're probably the things you need to get started on earliest.
That's great. So let's talk about the resume. And I think a lot of people kind of wonder, I don't have a ton of experience here, maybe have some internships and some full-time work. How do you stand out in your resume? What are some of the things to think about as you build your deferred MBA resume? Sydney, maybe we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah. Well, I think even though deferred candidates definitely have like less work experience, either in your undergrad or in your master's program, it doesn't mean that your goals and passions are any less important. So I think leaning on kind of unique what's and who's that motivate you at this stage of your life are just as crucial as standing out as it would be in the traditional MBA cycle. So kind of thinking about what do you want to do post MBA, even if that changes, and ultimately kind of thinking beyond your immediate career path. What motivates you, what excites you, and how would an MBA fit into that path?
Yeah, that sounds great. That's great. I maybe Dion, I'd love to get your thoughts. Anything that you'd add, and then also I think there's always the question of like, how important is the job that I have lined up in this process? And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that as well, Dion.
Well, I think just to build on what Sydney said, all schools are looking for people who are doers, who are builders, who are leaders. And you can show that in different ways through your internships and through your campus involvements. So I think knowing what, again, the admissions is looking for will help you understand what you need to highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, anything that you'd add on this one? Slash, how should people think about maybe full-time work generally, not only just on their resume, but what their plans are when they graduate?
Yeah, I think in choosing a job, I'm just big on like do something that you're actually passionate about. You'll do your best work there. You'll have stories to talk about there. Your interviews will come to life. Your essays will come to life. And as you think about like what you're passionate about in general, it really should be like as you look back at your career, there should be some through lines, some common ground. Those are oftentimes the most important things you can end up emphasizing in your app.
Yeah. Yeah. To build on that, oftentimes I'll hear people say like, what should I go into so that I can get into an MBA program? Which is like the wrong question, right? You need to figure out what you're passionate about, where you're going to do your best work. And that's what they're looking for, right? It's not the other way around. It's not they have a list of things they want and then you go do that and then you automatically get in. The other thing I would say is, and this is something that Dion said earlier, they're looking for low risk, high reward candidates. And that's especially true in the deferred process where there's less data on you, right? You haven't been working for 3 to 5 years when you're applying, you're a student. And so you have to figure out how can I communicate to them that I am low risk and that I am high reward here. And it's kind of a tough balance, right? Because if you go into a traditional career path like consulting, banking, or other, which is obviously possible. I think Sydney, you're going to BCG, is that correct? Or you're at BCG? So certainly a possibility, but you need to figure out on top of that, how do you differentiate from the other people that are going into those paths? And if you're going into something very non-traditional, then you need to communicate to them why it's as high potential as something like BCG. So sort of a balance there, but it is, I guess the short answer is it's very important what you do. And it's most, some of the things that we talked about is how you should kind of guide and think about that decision. Let's talk about maybe tactically, and we'll go to you, Ben, first on this. What are the biggest differences that you see between like a typical MBA resume versus like a recruiting job resume?
Yeah, I think it's oftentimes a lot more geared to like a so what? Like what's the impact that you've had? Like each bullet should either be something very clear, like a core responsibility, an initiative that you led, something significant that came out of your work. I find that the answers are more typically the so what rather than demonstrating, like, for example, core skills if you're applying to like a development or a computer science role where you might want to emphasize the work you've specifically done in Java or Python.
Yeah. Anything Sydney or Dion you'd add?
I would add just in terms of language as well. I think in an MBA resume, you want the language to be more accessible. When you're applying to a specific job, obviously you're going to look at that position, see what the in-demand skills are and try to tailor, to match that job. And you might use some industry jargon in those cases that you wouldn't really want on your MBA resume.
Absolutely.
So I agree with that. You need to show what are your transferable, relevant skills and your personal strengths. And oftentimes later on, when you're applying for a job, you can assume that the HR recruiter or hiring manager understands your acronym or is interested in, for instance, in banking, a particular transaction. You don't know for sure that the admissions reader has all the background that a recruiter would have when they're evaluating your resume.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I like to summarize it, it really does sound like you need to show it. You need to think through why would the CEO of your organization care about what you did? And if you're an engineer and you're talking about, reducing latency in some specific thing, that may be valuable, but they need to know what's the connection up level, because you as a future business leader coming out of these schools should be thinking about the bigger picture. And they'll ask you that in your interview. I had interned at Uber when I had applied to business school, and they asked me, is Uber too big to fail? What would you do differently if you were Uber's CEO? And I was I was a low-level intern, right? Those were not questions I thought about on a day-to-day basis, but it was super important that I had an opinion on that because that's what good leaders do. Okay, great. Let's talk about the GMAT GRE briefly, because it's clearly something that people get really stressed about. We obviously have some amazing GMAT and GRE tutors on the platform. Many of you are already working with them, so I definitely encourage you to check those out. And we're happy to drop in the link. That's very helpful in kind of getting over the hurdle. But there's also lots of other things that people can do to study for the GMAT or GRE and even decide which one to take. Sydney, how did you said you decided to take the GMAT, that was better suited for your strengths. How did you decide that? And then how did you study to be successful?
Yeah, in terms of deciding it, I know both the GRE and GMAT are going through some changes, so definitely I was taking the older version. But at the time, I just performed better on the GMAT, and I think the baseline is not everything, but it can be a good indicator of, how much you can actually accomplish with some studying. And so I purchased a Princeton review package. It had a ton of great, adaptive drills, study materials, and of course, real practice tests. And I found that kind of set of materials was crucial for me, like regularly practicing. For about 2 months, I drilled down before taking it. But looking back, I do think that one-on-one tutoring to kind of pinpoint those areas on the practice tests that were maybe a bit weaker would have maybe even, had a higher score result in the end. So I would definitely recommend that too.
Yeah. Dion or Ben, anything else you'd recommend on studying for the GMAT, the GRE?
I would do it. Just do it fast. Get it done. Blitz it out. Take practice tests. Don't waste your time reading dissertations on sentence correction. Do questions. Experiment. See where you're weak. This is a test not of your IQ, but of how you manage time and can execute basic tactics largely, and then slightly more sophisticated tactics under time constraint and pressure. So once you get that rhythm down, just build momentum and get it done.
I agree. You want to be as productive and time efficient as possible. So it's not an IQ test, as Ben said. If you're having trouble and you realize there's a pattern or an area, whether it's content or strategy, get help early. There's no sense doing the same mistake over and over again and being disappointed. You want to get it out of your way.
Yeah. That's a very, the last thing you want is to be taking the GMAT the night before you submit your application, because every time you start to work and brainstorm on your essay, which requires creativity, you have in the back of your mind, I should be drilling sentence correction or quant questions or whatever. So get it out of the way early. A couple of things to reiterate. It does not matter if you take the GMAT or the GRE. They are both equally accepted, and you will have classmates that will have taken both. So don't pick a test because you think it's a better test for the school and be lower than you would be if you had taken the other test, right? It's better to be above average than to be below average, which sounds obvious, but I think some people maybe have some older preconceived notions. So it doesn't matter. And I would, in terms of the new GMAT focus and new GRE tests, look at the school's websites for the best, most up-to-date information. They will tell you what they're accepting and when they're accepting certain things, because the tests are changing, and it's important to kind of stay up to date on that. Great, super helpful. We also, by the way, last night on the GMAT GRE, we're doing a big GMAT GRE week in about a month, and we will send that to you. So encourage you to come to those sessions if you are lower on quant or you're trying to get trying to decide which test to take. That'll be a really helpful series of events. All right, Dion, I'll go to you for this question. Why are recommendations so important? How does an admissions team think about them in the context of a broader application?
Well, for you as a deferred applicant, recommendations are really important because you can figure out, once you have your strategy for what you're going to say about yourself, you can help your recommenders provide specific examples that demonstrate your strengths and say it in a way that you can't. For instance, you may say, I am, or you may actually be extremely empathetic, but you're not in a position to say, hey, just take my word, I am the most empathetic person ever. However, your recommender can do that. And importantly, they can compare you to your peers. Ben, we'll use Ben's name. Ben is in the top 5% in these qualities, or Ben is amongst the top 5 students I've ever worked with. That's something that is more factual than you putting an opinion of yourself.
Yeah, I hope Ben's essay doesn't say I'm in the top 5% of people I've ever met. It's totally true. It's ideally recommendations say things that would be uncomfortable if you said them about yourself, or just like, unbelievable. So that's great. Let's go to the next question, which I think is, we get a lot of questions around how to prepare. I also think it's worth thinking through how to select, because it's stressful. It's hard to know how to choose. Sydney, maybe how did you select, and how do you help other people select? And then also, what did you do to prepare them? You mentioned some templates, and would love to hear how you thought about this.
Yeah. So in terms of selection, I had interned for BCG the summer before my senior year and had some amazing mentors there. So I think that was pretty initially clear to me, going to choose one of those. And actually my last week before I left the internship, I was able to float the idea of applying and then maintain kind of regular monthly check-in meetings to not only, continue cultivating that relationship, but to share mutual updates. So I would share, starting my test prep, I'm thinking about this essay narrative. And she was actually incredible about also giving me feedback on essays. So there was so much beyond the deferred MBA process that I got from just maintaining a good relationship with my recommender throughout. And then my other recommender came from a supervisor for my senior year job. And I know that professors are also totally viable recommendation options. But in my case, I think that my supervisor really saw me on a day-to-day basis because I was part-time in the spring. And that kind of supervision they had over me was way more than any of my professors had. So that's why I went with them instead. And in terms of templates, I think it's really important to do legwork wherever you can for your recommenders. So that includes, highlighting for them the notable moments of your internship or of your class research, et cetera, experience with them. And so they can take away kind of what you want them to from your experience, and to also share your narrative, share the essay topics you're thinking of, share why you want an MBA with them so that they can make sure to mirror that in how they're portraying you too.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. Yeah, anything, Ben, you'd add in terms of preparation?
No, I think that's all great. I think just remember, and I certainly felt this, your recommenders are busy people, and they're doing you a favor. Make it really easy. Give them a doc that has all the dates, specific things that needs to be asked. Put it in one place for them so they never have any questions and they don't feel like it's a hassle for them at any point to go through this process. It will require effort, so minimizing their effort will go a long way with them.
Yeah. That's super helpful. Yeah, I think a couple notes I'd add on selection. Read the website and what the schools are looking for. Most of them, they require at least one direct supervisor in a professional context. And most of them also don't love professors, which I know a lot of you are like, oh crap, that's exactly what I was going to have. The reason for that is because they aren't looking for people that just come in and get good grades and go to class, right? They're looking for people who are going to be leaders who change the world. And it's rare that a professor has insight into that. So if you choose a professor, consider doing some sort of research with them, or TAing for them, or working with them in a close capacity so that they can touch on some of those things that they're interested, that you want them to touch on. You might also think about, okay, if I am going to ask a professor that I've done, I've TA'd for, I've done some research on or with, they likely can talk about my analytical ability, my curiosity, a lot of the sort of thought process characteristics that that schools might be interested in. So you better make sure that your other recommender talks about your leadership and your influence and a lot of the things that might be tough for that professor to get a perspective on. And then we also have a recommender prep doc that we will send out. You can just use that template and edit it for your own situation. It's what Ben was referring to. we definitely encourage you to work with a coach to prepare those so that they're really buttoned up. Because you don't want to ask them to write your recommendation and then have them say, well, yeah, why don't you just write it? And then I'll just sign my name on it. This doc is to help make it easy for them so that they can write it. And they, again, as Dion mentioned, will write things that are uncomfortable for you to say about yourself. And that's good. And so making it as really as easy as possible for them is super important. Dion, anything else you'd recommend in terms of preparation or that you've done to help clients to be successful here?
I think it's been touched upon, but I do recommend starting early. Like Sydney gave the example of keeping up a conversation. So the first time you talk to them about recommendations, it's not like a year later and you're asking for a favor. Help them understand where you are at and feel like a part of your journey so that they want to support you.
Yeah, that's a great call. I will say it feels to me like deferred applicants have the advantage when it comes to recommenders. And the reason is because you've typically been involved in multiple things. You've done internships, you've maybe done clubs, you've done extracurricular activities. And so you tend to have a few different options, and schools know that. And so you can be really thoughtful. Ideally, you do have a professional direct manager. But that second one can be a little bit creative, and have conversations early. I recommended I thought I was going to ask a recommender. I went to lunch with him and I said, hey, do you think you'd be willing to write a recommendation for me, or would you be open to it? And he was like, yeah, I'd be happy to. You think I'm the best person? I don't know. And I was like, yeah, now I know you're not the best person. And I went and asked someone else and they were like, yes, let me write your recommendation. I would love to. And so it just became so much clearer, and having that conversation early was really helpful. Okay. So just to do a quick overview of like the essays you're going to see, it's kind of hard to bucket them. But if we were to try, sort of like the first bucket is personal statement essays. It's the flagship, what matters most to you and why, that you get from Stanford. It's the, what else do you want us to know from Harvard? Cover letter from MIT, what values are important to you? This is sort of like, tell us who you are, why it should matter to us. Then you also see lots of essays that are about the school. Why do you want to go here? How will we help you achieve your goals? This is important to schools. Want to be your number one option. They don't want to feel like they're playing second fiddle to another school. And this is a great way for you to communicate that. And then the last bucket is sort of a catch-all bucket, right? It could be a number of different things. Tell us about a time you had a positive impact. Describe the biggest commitment you've ever made. And you'll see a lot of these. And I think Ben mentioned a couple of additional questions that you'll see from Stanford about impact or your background or extracurricular activities. So there's a lot of essays. And if you're applying to 5 schools, you will be writing what will likely be at least 15 essays. And of course, they will have overlap in some places, but you will want to dedicate individual attention to all of them. So really important that you decide on those schools, open up those applications, and start to get a feel for it. Let's talk about those personal statement essays first. Dion, maybe we'll start with you this time. How do you recommend, someone opens up the what matters most to you and why essay? How do you recommend starting such a meaty essay?
Well, I have some pre-writing exercises. I said earlier that really reflection is a very important part. So there are 2 parts of an essay. What do you want to say? And then how are you going to communicate it? And I think oftentimes people underestimate the importance of being, I guess, intentional and strategic and authentic about what they want to say. And oftentimes, for instance, for the Stanford, what matters most, but actually for other schools too, it comes down to your values, like what really, keeps you up at night, what really gives you energy, what makes you motivated. And you can pick a subject, therefore, that you feel excited about and go from there.
That's great. Ben, anything else you'd add?
Yeah. I mean, I like to go really, really wide before I go deep with the essays. This really entails, for me at least, asking like a wide range of introspective questions about your life, why you care about what you care about, why you've done what you've done, what are the most formative experiences you've gone through, positive and negative. And then coupling that by walking some folks through what I think are some really, really great essays by people who have gotten in. And really the purpose of that is the opposite of let's copy these essays and write them just like these essays. The purpose is to totally expand what you think might belong in an essay. And then we actually take inventory of what you've done, what you care about, and you can form fit the style and emulate the best parts of those successful essays while also completely making it your own adventure. And I think end up writing something very compelling. So I think just doing that initial introspection and just like writing bad first drafts on repeat for a week or two is a great way to start. And then you can start to implement some of these more strategic ideas.
Yeah, that's great. Sydney, anything else you'd add?
I just like to kind of piggyback on the through lines thing that Ben mentioned. I think that's really important. And think about what stories pop up on those through lines, what stories and experiences. Because I think with narrative, it's helpful to think about moments of great impact for yourself, where things really moved you, or you've, had an impact that was really important, versus some overarching thesis. Thinking about those like micro moments along the way.
Yep, that's great. These are tough. These are tough essays. They are super important. You're communicating what you've done, who you are. Actually, probably more of who you are, sorry, not than what you've done. What you've done comes out in a lot of the resume and other things, a little bit of what you've done. And also why it matters. You can't just tell them like, this is me, I'm empathetic through this story. It needs to connect to like why that should matter to them, because it's going to matter to the world. So it's great advice. All right, in terms of the why this school essay, I'll open it up to any of you that feel passionate about this question in particular. Stanford has one where it's, why Stanford, describe your aspirations and why Stanford will help you achieve them. And then there's other, Wharton questions that are specific. How do you recommend thinking about these essays?
I'm happy to start, y'all. I honestly think this is one of, if not the most important question for me, to me, as somebody who loves the what matters most essay quite a bit. And the reason is it's kind of important for you to at least create a good, you don't have to know everything about what you're going to do with your future. Nobody does, but creating like a viable like hypothesis as to why you want to pursue what you want to pursue is just a great exercise, and frankly should be a litmus test as to whether you should even be applying for MBA and whether you should be applying to those specific programs. I personally love the essay so much because, like, fun fact, like everything that I wrote about in my essays happened. Like I wrote like, hey, I was going to do this, 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 and this, because I was super intentional about my narrative and specific to like what I want to do with my life. And I wrote about a bunch of this stuff and then looked at the essay, like, I don't know, 2 years later, and like it all had occurred. And I was like, that was awesome. But I think it just came from me genuinely thinking about why I wanted to go and matching up the resources and the people at GSB that actually would bring that to life.
Yeah. And I would just add, like, some of the brainstorming for these questions can be done in your school selection process. So thinking about what's a good fit for you, research the schools, see what programs they have, the classes, professors, clubs, and see how you would really find yourself fitting in at that school. That could also be done instead of just online research. You can speak to current students. A lot of the schools actually have ambassador opportunities where you can, I know I did that with a few schools, where you can speak to current students and ask them these questions. Like, here's, something I'm interested in. Is there a club for that? And, if they have a similar background, what are some of the classes you've loved? And understand that early on, so you can not only select the right schools, but really genuinely write this answer. And in the behavioral interviews, if you do get an interview, they're gonna probably, ask something along these lines as well.
Yeah, that's a really positive signal. Like if you're Booth and you see, wow, this student has taken time to talk to our students, ask thoughtful questions, has included those anecdotes in their essay, and now is mentioned in their interview, like this person cares about our school and has done the homework and would be a good fit. It's a great call out. Anything else you'd add, Dion, before we move on?
I look at it as kind of a reverse engineering exercise. Given your goals in the future, then why do you need an MBA? Why now? And then why this school? And then your opportunity to articulate what you want to learn, what you want to do, what you want to experience, and importantly, what you want to contribute while you're in business. Establishes school fit.
Yeah, that's a really important call out. your job is not to tell Stanford why they're awesome. They know why they're awesome. Like Wharton doesn't care about your take on why Wharton's the best. They care about how they are going to help you reach their goals and what you're going to contribute on their campus. That's really valuable. And I think this is a good kind of tie this back to the resume. As you think about what you put on your resume, showing them that you contributed at your undergrad institution may also help them understand, wow, if this person shows up, they've been the president of the tech club at WashU or whatever. If they show up at HBS, they're probably going to be involved in the tech club here. They're probably going to be involved. They probably are going to care about the campus. And I think that's really important. Okay, we're coming up on the last few questions. A lot of good stuff still, but want to hear how should you think about a generic candidacy? You're going to BCG, you're going to Goldman Sachs, you have kind of a background that doesn't seem so outlandishly different. How should you think about standing out? And Sydney, I'd love to hear from your perspective. You were really successful in this. How did you think about this?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm happy to answer. So, consulting, banking can be sometimes saturated pools. And I think that double clicking into kind of your goals beyond the industry itself, especially if you only see yourself in it for that short, immediate period after graduation, is important. So I can give an example, maybe like from my own application. I'm entering consulting immediately after grad, but in the long term, I'm really interested in multinational development. And I studied global affairs and I was able to kind of double click into that and had the opportunity to go on a trip following the international supply chain of a consumer brand. And so focusing on those experiences, consulting is just one piece. It's that problem solving piece, but my goals kind of go beyond any specific industry, especially a generic industry. And I just try to be as truthful to, my long-term ambitions as possible, not ignoring consulting, but just really thinking more deeply than just my immediate 2 to 3 years after graduation.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Ben, Dion, you feel strongly about this question?
Yeah, I like this question a lot. And it's a question I have gotten from about 90% of the people that I've worked with. And because almost everybody perceives themselves as somewhat traditional or predictable because you're living with yourself 100% of the time. And I can guarantee you that what matters the most in this is doing great work and doing ultimately what you're passionate about, or at least pushing forward everything you can to the highest degree possible. And I can give my own life as an example in the sense that, like, I was at McKinsey. It's a great firm, but it's a pretty traditional path. I mean, it's consulting. You make slides and you work in Excel occasionally, right? And what I did personally was, like, I brought my passions to my job. Like, I pitched a project to a couple partners based on a fellowship I had done. And I was like, hey, like, why don't, like, I know we're doing some prison reform work. Like, why don't we do like in prison job training? And at the time that didn't materialize into anything. But a month later, one of the partners contacted me to run that work stream. And so I ended up spending the better part of a year and change, like working in prisons, like implementing workforce dev programs and like getting incarcerated folks jobs and pipelines out. And so a line that I heard at Admit Weekend, which I think describes that and many other situations for applicants who think they're coming from a traditional background, is the people who get into GSB found a way to do their traditional path in a non-traditional way. And I think that is like the genesis of what made the experience that I had at McKinsey and a lot of the experiences of the folks that I've worked with and others have done actually land for admissions readers.
Yeah, I love that. Dion, I'd love to hear your take on this question too. As a coach, we see it all the time. You have a ton of demand. You cap out the number of students you can help. What do you look for on the applicant side as just to see if someone would be a good fit to work with?
Well, I look for people who are really committed to investing what it takes, that don't think that this is like a one and done or a slick marketing exercise. And I feel actually very rewarded when my clients later to tell me that, maybe I wouldn't want to apply again just for the heck of it, but I got a lot out of it. It really led me to think about who I am, the choices I made, and what I want to do. So I'm looking for people who are open to feedback, self-aware, and committed. If I'm going to be contributing 150% effort, then they should too.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, anything you'd add on this one?
Yeah, I think for me, like a demonstrable sense of like proactivity is my like biggest thing. Like the sense, even after just like a quick call with somebody, that someone wants to hit the ground running and get things going and start cracking on some of these questions. A tells me that they're really serious about the process, and I don't care if your GPA is a 3.1 and you go to a non-target school. I don't care. If you are ready to start early and put some real energy into this process, you're already in the 90th percentile of applicants. And I think there's a lot of nuances that require ironing out for you to actually end up with the best foot forward, as they say. And so getting started with that almost guarantees you that you'll get to that fourth, fifth draft of the essay, or the sixth, seventh iteration of your short answers, whatever it is. And so I think starting early and demonstrating proactivity and getting moving, for me as a coach, like it goes it goes a long way.
Yeah. Sydney, anything you'd add?
I just second what Dion and Ben said. I think proactivity and passion are key. And I think as a coach, we're partnering with you in this process. So we just want someone who is eager to partner with us and eager for their own reasons to go through this application process and can, have a good energy throughout the process.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so let's wrap it up with a final tip before we do some kind of logistical things at the end. What's your final tip? We've covered a lot of ground. We haven't covered even close to as much as we wish we could cover, which is why many of you have already started signing up for Leland Plus. Definitely encourage you to do that, because we have in-depth videos on all of these topics. But if there's something that we haven't covered, and any final tip that you have, what would it be? Maybe we'll go to you, Sydney, and then Dion, and then Ben.
Perfect. I would say my biggest tip is just to ask for help. I think it's easy when you're continuously writing and refining your essays to get bogged down in the topics and not really see your own full picture, especially when you're entering in all these different word counts for different schools. I think it all starts to maybe blend at certain points. Don't be afraid to take a step back, ask a friend, family member, a Leland coach, for advice, and to review your materials with a really fresh set of eyes.
That's great. Dion, what would you add?
I guess building on my earlier comment, it's a final tip would be to have a bias towards action, be willing to take risks, work hard early, as opposed to waiting to launch. I think one of the things that I see in essays that is most challenging is when a applicant says, I want to do this and this and this in the future, but they have no evidence of having ever thought about it or worked on it or experienced it before. So start early, don't wait.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Dion. Like the things you write about in your essay should not come as a surprise to the person you read. If I wrote my whole essay about wanting to make a trombone startup, it wouldn't really work because I don't know anything about trombones. Don't do that. I think though, final tip is that I think a lot of this process, for me at least, and I know for others as well at this point, it feels a little unnatural. You have to waver between selling yourself to a prestigious MBA program and somehow being authentic. You have to squeeze your life into 650 words. You have to neatly parse all the experiences you've had into various questions, short answers, whatever it is. I think Sydney brought up the point of ask for help. I would double down on that and say ask for help, especially about these in between things and these very I think more psychological entanglements, less how do I write? Those are real too, but ask for help, ping your coach, talk to whoever is in your life and is supporting you about some of these weird nuances to the process, and don't be afraid to do that at all.
Yeah, super helpful. This was awesome. Can everyone show some love in the chat to all these panelists? So many good insights. Loved hearing all of your different takes. All of these coaches are going to fill up probably by the end of the year, some of them even within the next few weeks. So if you are interested in working with them, you can scan the QR code. We'll also send their profiles out later. Definitely encourage you to reach out to them. They're at different price points. They have different experiences, but they're all incredibly helpful. And just can't stress enough to get started early and to get their perspective. So feel free to reach out to them. We will drop their profiles in the chat. Again, we've already seen a ton of you already taking advantage of this deal, but take advantage of it. It's cutting the price in half. We've never done a discount this steep. Want to make sure that students can access all of this amazing content and resources. So use DMBA for $110 off Leland Plus. Can't encourage you enough to get access to that along with coaching. And thanks for being here. It's great to see so many hundreds of on top of it seniors, certainly more on top of their lives than I was. Make sure you sign up for your free Leland account, join Leland Plus, book with your coach, and submit an application you're proud of. This is a stressful process, but it's incredibly rewarding. Some of the most important and impactful years of my life were at Stanford getting my MBA. You can debate the value of an MBA all you want, but talk to people who've done it. Most likely, especially at these schools, and they will tell you that it was an amazing life experience and helped them in so many ways. So we're here to help. We're excited for you, and we believe in you. So keep us posted and let us know how we can help. Thank you all. Good luck. Thanks, Ben, Dion, Sydney. Take care.